Welcome to Green Money Matters, the podcast where your financial future meets the planet's well-being, bringing you the latest on climate issues and uncovering new and exciting investment opportunities that make a positive impact.
And I'm Chris Everett, your guide to sustainable investing, ESG funds, and all things green. Each week, we'll explore the intersection of money and sustainability, showing you how investing wisely can create a greener world and grow your money.
So get ready to invest with a conscience and join the growing movement of individuals who are reshaping the financial landscape. Welcome to Green Money Matters.
So, hello everybody. Welcome to Green Money Matters. Today we have on the show our Paul Herman from HIP Investor. Paul, welcome.
Good to be with you.
Very good here to see you too. Paul is the CEO, founder, chief investment officer of HIP Investor. Paul, tell us a little bit about HIP and where you got started with it.
Sure. Well, HIP Investor, HIP stands for Human Impact Plus Profit. So essentially, you can do good and make money at the same time. Is what's the potential for all of us in society and with our portfolios. So HIP Investor really is about two things. One, understanding the positive or negative impact that any investment makes. All investments have positive or negative or a blend. And then we produce ratings of those of that positive impact on people, on planet, and trust. And then we invest according to those ratings. And so higher HIP rated investments on average can make more money over time, and lower HIP rated investments frequently are more risky and make less money. And what it really enforces is that investing for impact can be a positive return on investment, treating people better, not polluting the environment, not wasting natural resources, building up trust, not getting sued. So that's a quick highlight of some of the things we do at HIP.
Makes absolute sense. Great. Thank you, Paul. Now, I mean, you're a great resource on all aspects of sustainable investing, and you have authored, produced, edited, published two books, I believe. One is the HIP Investor book, and the other one is the Global Handbook of Impact Investing. Is the second one a rerun of the first one? What is the difference between the two? What can our listeners gain from reading these books?
Well, the first book, the HIP Investor book, was published in 2010 by Wiley and Wiley Finance. And it's essentially anybody can read it. It's written for everyday readership and explains the principles between how you can do good and make money in your portfolio over time. Lots of case studies, lots of real tangible examples, stories to learn from, and a framework, essentially the outline of a HIP framework. Just like if you bought a cookbook from a French chef, you would read the HIP Investor if you wanted a sustainable portfolio. And that's in a couple dozen universities who are teaching finance, sustainability, as well as social impact. There's a couple of classes that teach about the Sustainable Development Goals. The second book came out in 2021 during COVID, and that's a combination of 50 expert authors in impact investing, in social impact, in academia. And those 30 chapters essentially cover everything from climate-friendly investing and going fossil-free to gender lens investing, as well as how a corporation can run sustainably and how to affect change management. So that's a little bit more dense and intense and advanced. It's also 1,300 pages. So it's as big as War and Peace. It's actually a little bit bigger, but more peace than war. And so that also is a
Excellent.
resource, but a little bit more in depth. And both books are still relevant today. So the Hip Investor book will be 14 years old on Earth Day 2024. And this month, January 2024, is the 3-year anniversary of the Global Handbook of Impact Investing. So I was the co-editor and co-author of several chapters as well.
How's the landscape changed in the years between the first book and the second book?
Well, demand has increased, of course, as more people become aware, whether through political elections of surprises or through COVID, which really raised awareness that wow, our world's connected. That B, that by focusing on sustainability and how our systems work together to produce positive outcomes in people, planet, and trust, or may encounter negative outcomes of people, planet, and trust. It spurred a drive that government won't always solve problems, so we ourselves need to solve them. And we can do some of that through our portfolio, some of that through where we work, obviously, how we buy every day, what we buy, as well as how we vote. So that's one major shift, the proliferation of more products and investment strategies, as well as investment ratings and sustainable investment books. That's expanded. The communities organizing together, like people using their retirement plans, their 401ks and 403bs in the States to make individual selections that can be fossil free and sustainable. These are all gaining momentum. Now, what's also gaining momentum is some of the forces working against that, some of the entrenched interests, some conservatives, ultra conservatives, hyper conservatives who say, no, we should be separate. White and black
ESG is woke.
Black people don't need to get along, work together. The environment, God created it, God will fix it. As well as I can do anything I want, and unless you don't necessarily have a law to fight me back. These are things that will destroy our society, that will reduce the value of our portfolios, that will cause higher turnover at work, that will cause brown water to come out of your faucet instead of clean water. Several societies, including the Romans, figured out how to move clean water from mountains to local communities 2,000 years ago. And they were able to keep it mostly clean, possibly some lead pipes along the way. We don't seem to value some of these miracles, these daily miracles that are in our lives. And so it's a true miracle to get clean water out of a faucet. So when we do natural gas fracking that pollutes the wells, or we don't maintain our infrastructure, we don't test the water quality, these are things that affect our everyday lives. And so we've learned enough over thousands of years of history to be more civilized. And impact investing and sustainable investing is a way to propagate even more civilized behavior and civilized results. So that's the shock, is that some people would fight against this. It's understandable how fossil fuels would fight against it, because we're saying don't use any more of those, go use renewable energy, not don't extract high emissions fossil energy. That carbon that comes out of your tailpipe lives on for another 100 years. But rather, what is surprising is that some people don't want to get along and don't want to work together and don't see the value of diversity. And that requires more education. And what we show at HIP through all of our work in investment ratings and investment portfolios, is that there's a positive return on investment from treating people right, paying them well, not overpaying CEOs. And there's a positive return on investment from using less natural resources and focusing on clean water and clean energy. And there's a positive return on investment from building more trust in society, not breaking it down. Because those companies with higher lawsuits actually are more volatile and don't necessarily grow over time.
It's interesting, the analogy used with the Romans. I mean, there's a strong school of thought that, as you said, lead in the water eventually led to mental health problems and effectively madness, and effectively led to the downfall of the Roman Empire. So perhaps a really good historical lesson and an analogy there for us all. I'm very interested. I mean, the woke, anti-woke movement, which is it's having an impact on ESG funds, isn't it?
It's having an impact in multiple ways. So corporations and investment managers don't like to invite controversy. We at HIP, we're fine with controversy because we believe that this is a productive, forward-looking way to improve society and improve the strength of portfolios, reduce risk, and enhance cash flow. So what's interesting is, and this has happened over time. So we talked about the Romans, let's talk about Galileo. So there are many times when scientific discoveries are repelled by the people of the time. And this has happened many times in science, also many times in Explore. So we all know that Galileo wasn't necessarily agreed with at the time of whether the Earth goes around the sun or the sun goes around the Earth. But also, in more recent times, explorers looking for the Northwest Passage in Canada, Cabot found the Northwest Passage. It wasn't accepted for another 100 years. Former US President Teddy Roosevelt found new channels in the Amazon basin. But the US and UK Geographic Society, when he came back, they're like, no, you didn't. And so these radical transformations, breakthrough transformations in insight and wisdom, frequently are fought back by our, how our biology and our humanity evolves over time. And so it's very frustrating to obviously have to live through that because it's the right answer for people, planet, and trust, and your portfolio. That if you invest in a way that is more inclusive, more efficient, more productive, that of course you're going to do something. So I like to describe it as, how would you explain what you do to your mother? Would your mother approve if you underpay employees? Would your mother approve if you say, oh yeah, that pipe's leaking out there, we don't need to worry about that smoke or that those chemicals spilling into the river? Would your mother approve if you said, oh yeah, I have 5 lawsuits this week? Oh, what are they for? Well, you're being accused of extractive behavior. Are you being extractive?
The mum rule.
So some people call it the front page headline rule. I'm not sure if that applies as much currently, but think about what your mother would say about what you're doing. And
no, some people like the love the headlines regardless, but the mum rule is spot on.
So
I think
that's so this pushback is to protect the past, and if most people got a chance to live in the past, it might sound attractive, but what did we have? We had less healthcare. We had less flexibility. We couldn't be doing a show like this with us in 2 different countries. We had less in the past, and we will have more in the future if we actively invest in it and protect it. And in times when we don't invest in our future, we delay a better future. So, so that's what we I'd say, about our current times and transformation. It's happened before to
Are you
Galileo and to Roosevelt and to Cabot, and to under recognizing women, say, co-discovering DNA. Um,
Yeah.
so it's up to us to create the future we want to live in, and that's the potential of sustainability and impact investing.
Are you optimistic, Paul?
I am a long-term optimist and a short-term worrier. So I know if there are crises in history, and right now we're facing 5 crises. We have 5 pillars at HIP based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the 5 pillars are health and wealth, earth and equality, and trust. And so health, wealth, earth, equality, and trust. We have crises in each of them. We have a lingering COVID, uh, respiratory virus, and other health crises, as well as in some places like the US, an affordability crisis for healthcare. Um, in wealth, there are income gaps that keep reemerging, including.
Tell us. Sorry, Paul. Tell us a little bit about the CEO gap, the CEO pay gap.
Sure.
How has that changed, and what sort of impacts is that having?
Well, so CEOs are highly paid all over the world, but in Asia and in Europe, they're paid semi-reasonably, and so the CEO might make in Asia, it's closer, sort of 5, 10, 20 times the average worker. In Europe, it can get up to 30 or 50 times the average worker, though in general, it's more measured. And in the US, since about the 1980s, it's gone from 100 times the worker to 200, 300, 400 for the S&P 500, and about the 300 times higher pay. But in extreme cases, and this is work that HIP Investor has done with As You Sow, a nonprofit based in the US and California, at asyousow.org. For 10 years, we've analyzed CEO pay of the S&P 500, the 500 largest firms in the US. And what we found is overpaid CEOs underperform as a group over time. You can find exceptions. But essentially what happens when you overpay a CEO, or a CEO proposes to be overpaid and is approved by their board, is it distorts how, how people are rewarded. Is it really the case where one person of a 10,000 person company is the reason to grow? And the answer is no. It takes 10,000 people to grow a company, to serve customers, to invent products. So there's very few founder inventors. Sure, Steve Jobs was one, or Google founders and others. But what it takes is an R&D team, a manufacturing team, an operations team, a finance team, a sales team, a service team. And so when you overpay one person, and it's usually a man, it's rarely a woman, though there are some examples of that. When you overpay one person, one, that sends a bad morale signal, like I'm king or I'm God. And two, it distorts how capital gets allocated, because it focuses on short-term results, not long-term returns. And that is a company killer. Or at least you prime your company to be acquired instead of, to be the acquirer. So what we find is returns are lower for the 100 most overpaid related to the other 400 in the S&P 500. So returns are muted, lower, or even negative in down markets. There's a morale gap that forms. And so you're better off as an investor being mindful of that as a metric. And so that's one of the 30 data-driven metrics that we look at with HIP. And so when CEOs are overpaid, we are more scrutinous about the company, and we typically underweight that company, given that overpay. So it's really simple. And again, that's another thing your mother would say is, why do you need to pay the CEO so much? Make sure you pay your workers enough.
Is there a sweet spot? Is there a sweet spot which rewards good administrators, good leaders, innovative people to take the responsibility, to take that sort of senior position, but which doesn't cause all these other disparities and disincentives?
Yeah, I mean no one's saying they have to work for free, and no one's saying you have to pay everybody the same. But do you have to pay an exorbitant rate? Obviously, some football, soccer players make a ton of money, and there's a real skill there that they've worked at their hard life in hyper competition. Running a company is easier than being a hyper athlete in sports. There's a lot of stress, there's a lot of work hours, but there will be no lack of competition for people who want to run the company. There's human ambition that over time persists. So, do you overpay generals in an army? No, there's a price structure and a compensation structure for that. There's still competition to be a general in in an army or an admiral in a navy. So I think we're overvaluing um, what is needed to attract the best talent. And
What sort of number is what factor would HIP investors look for as being, yeah, you've got it just about right, you guys? Would it be sort of 10 times the average worker's pay, 20? I've had 24 mentioned. What is your position?
I mean, we at least analyze what the comparative ratios are. But this 30 to 50 range seems like a reasonable range, and there is more complexity as organizations get bigger. And so when we have analyzed it in different countries around the world, we do look at it on a sort of geometric or exponential scale, because it's different managing a 10-person company versus a 1,000-person company versus a 100,000-person company. There's more complexity, but the pay doesn't have to reflect, orders of magnitude higher. The pay can reflect, these are tough problems to solve, and talented people like solving tough problems. And there's other benefits, the having the opportunity to travel to see all, the customers and the business units, and being an inspiring figure. So there is not it's hard to argue, especially when overpaid CEOs underperform. It's hard to argue that is, as a manager, that you earn that type of income, because some of those, like Jack Welch at General Electric, eventually was revealed that there was a lot of financial engineering that went on, rather than pure innovation. So inventors, who have a percentage or equity percentage or revenue percentage of their inventions, that seems like a reasonable way to reward wealth. But the management is tough, management is difficult, but it is there's a lot of supply of talented people to be able to do that, and most overpaid CEOs aren't great managers. They're not necessarily collaborative people. So let's reward the right characteristics to do so.
Very red personalities. On your 5 pillars of health, Earth is one of those. You mentioned that. Tell us a little bit about the climate threat resilience rating. How do you calculate that? How does that play a role?
Sure, happy to. So so the 5 pillars of impact at HIP are health, wealth, earth, equality, and trust. And so Earth, obviously, there's how organizations use natural resources, water, waste, energy, emissions. But then there's threats presented by the climate and the changing climate, the changing jet stream, the different risks of heat and cold, um, hurricanes and tornadoes, and the like. So, what we do is we take inputs from environmental organizations and environmental estimates. We're looking right now at satellite readings. So, there's a whole data stream now of being able to see different filters of infrared light and sort of ground cover uh, around the world. So that's a humongous data set. And combine that with emergency management response and payouts related to insurance claims to make that more granular by geographies. So in the U.S., that relates to counties. So there's 3,000. There's 50 states in the U.S., but there's 3,000 counties. So we translate climate threats into those 3,000 counties and grade them. That ends up in a very colorful map that looks like a lot of the south and coastal areas being more red. Part of that is due to heat, part of that's due to coastal risk. And then we complement that with resilience. Are the states or cities or counties implementing some form of climate resilience? Are there policies around greenhouse gas efficiency and usage? And are there climate actions that the cities, counties, or states are pursuing? Are they putting in electric vehicle infrastructure? Are they, preparing for disasters, things like that? So there's not enough climate resilience going on. So right now, that's getting a lower weight than we'd like to have. We'd like to value action higher, but it's still massively underfunded. So we need at least 10 times more money to go to climate action and climate resilience. And so with the lack of that money, there's a lot of plans, which we value, but there's limited action and limited progress relative to what we need. So the climate threat resilience ratings that we produce and have granular detail under, driven by real past results and the future expectations, value, put a data-driven number on risk. And how that gets used is there are mutual fund managers like Van Eck that operate funds that use our data on climate threat resilience. So it reduces the universe of because there's too high a risk to consider in those investments, as well as uses the HIP ratings, the Sustainable Development Goal ratings, and also opportunity zones, which are geographic areas with lower income and but job creation potential.
So that's this climate resilience map. Would that inform where you would want to live as well?
Well, it can.
Or certainly where you would advise to invest in property.
Yeah, that's usually the first question people ask is, where do I live? And then the second reaction, either by nervousness or skepticism, or is, oh, well, when's this going to happen? I'm not going to be alive then. And so that's like the, where do you live? Where does your family live? Where are your kids going to school or college? Where do you vacation? Do you have a second home? Like these are all very tangible things. And then it's, well, is this going to happen soon enough to happen to me? And okay, but what about your kids or your grandkids or other members of society? Yeah. Or what about where your food comes from? What about where your products come from? So there's still some layer of deflection that's happening right now that people need to get really serious about. And the skeptics or climate deniers are just saying, oh, we always have changes in climate. Of course we do. But it's a very involved system where right now in winter 2024, there's a lot of extreme cold. Part of that is because the jet stream has become weaker, and so the polar vortex or the Arctic air can seep lower. And so what will get confused is, oh, it's colder, it's not global warming. No, it is global warming because a higher temperature in the world would have a stronger jet stream, which would contain the Arctic cold and winds and precipitation. So there's a big gap in scientific understanding and climate understanding, even independent of how humans want to relate to solving a problem or denying that there is a problem.
Yeah, you can't second guess what sort of catastrophe is going to happen where, with climate change happening so rapidly and with so little relatively understanding as to how these models are really going to play out, because there are so many different factors
Yeah,
involved.
and it's and that, the words we've used just right now have only talked about the weather. What about the food? What about the pollinators like the bees? What about the balance of temperature in the oceans of the fish and the coral? So, and then our infrastructure. So, our electrical infrastructure is not built for these massive extremes. There are some cases in conservative states like Texas where they say, oh, let the free market determine what the reliability and strength of the electrical grid is. And you end up with, surprise, surprise, no surprise, disasters related to that. So there's a lot of ripple effects and known consequences and a lot of unknown consequences. And so if we are lazy or ignorant or refuse to take action, we're going to have to deal with a lot more volatility and change than if we were being proactive. So, yeah, so that's, I mean, there are a lot of major transformations needed to go from an extractive economy, a fossil based economy, a one ignoring externalities, to one that is more enlightened and illuminated and say, ask the questions of how's everything connected and how can I create positive ripple effects and mitigate negative ripple effects? These are important questions. So that's what we try and do in everything that we analyze, whether it's people, planet, and trust factors related in equities or muni bonds or real estate or infrastructure. These are real risk factors, and finance is about risk as well as return. So it's hard to get a big return if you don't take some risk, and to take some risk, you need to invent new solutions. So, as an investor and as a human, this is a really exciting time to help solve these problems.
How do you stop people gaming the system? How do you stop the greenwashers? I mean, you play the role as a game, but there's continual companies out there trying to game the system, trying to poach an advantage. How does HIP assess those sort of external strategies, and how do you account for them?
Sure. Yeah, great question, Chris. And so that is, so one is to be quantitative data oriented. And so is to represent reality by what's actually happening in some quantitative way. Now, there's a critique that, oh, isn't that subjective? Isn't taking surveys of people's satisfaction subjective? You could critique it that way, but are you saying you don't believe that people report how they really feel? Like, that's kind of objective to me, for example. There's other new discoveries like methane. Methane is invisible to our everyday eyes, but it's not invisible to an infrared camera. So there's a lot of methane leaks happening in many places. That's real data. So one principle we have is represent reality in as tangible data as possible. When that doesn't exist and it's very important or material, and there's a beginning trend of a group of organizations that are reporting this, then we penalize people who could but do not report with the lowest possible score. So in our HIP framework, a transparent reporting bottom quartile organization will rate higher than an organization that does not report because you can't see it. So we value transparency first, and then performance second, and then accountability. So higher scores for more transparent companies, higher scores for higher performing companies that are transparent, and higher scores for companies that take and manage accountability based on that performance and transparency. So that's how we, that's one way that we approach it. Another way is creating lists of leaders and laggards and trying to spur that. And so we've worked with the media, like the Financial Times, to call out who are the top 10, who are the bottom 10. And obviously, the bottom 10 don't like that. And sometimes they try to manipulate the message. So there was one example with a telecom company that was supposed to provide low cost internet in rural West Virginia. And that company was sued for promising something that wasn't delivered, $10 a month high speed internet. And that judgment, a multi-$100 million judgment, was found against the company. And they made our list of worst legal judgments. And the general counsel wrote the Financial Times saying, you need to retract what you published, analyzed by HIP. Why? Well, because it wasn't classified as a legal expense on our financial statements. And so what they had done that was financial engineering to take the legal judgment to invest and put it in capital expenditures and not put it under legal expense. And that's just not genuine. That's, and so when we explained it to the Financial Times, they agreed with us. They refused to print the retraction. They printed his letter to the editor. But these are the types of wrangling that hopefully people don't genuinely believe, but that they feel forced into from their bad behavior. They should either A, should have never promised to deliver low speed internet if they weren't going to do it. Two, if they were going to do it, they should have done it. And then three, when they were held accountable, accept your punishment and move on. But don't contrast with the truth. So part of why we're dedicated to what we do is we're dedicated to showing the truth. We're revealers of truth. And positive people take that and say, okay, how do we improve? How do we make ourselves better? And people who don't want to be held accountable fight against it. And it can be depressing. So that's so bringing data-driven reality in a framework that compares to science-based targets as well as comparative performance. And so, when we say science-based targets, it's not just, are you the best of lagging people? It's how far away are you from a standard? What is a standard of living that everybody needs to earn? What is a environment that's in balance? So where possible, we try and bring that. So, for example, in one of the things we do is rate K to 12, kindergarten to grade 12 school systems, and there actually is research, academic research, on how many kids are optimal in a classroom on average, and it's about 17 kids in a classroom. So schools that have 34 kids, twice as many, get a lower rating, and schools that have half as many, let's say 8 kids, get a higher rating because they're going to get more attention. They're going to have more engagement. They're going to have more interactivity. So we try and bring some of those science-based targets in all the investments that we evaluate, as well as comparative behavior. And what's really eye-opening is we have both like an absolute score for this science-based, evidence-based target, and we have a relative score. And in public equities, what is the case is there's a lot of extractive behavior in corporations. So it's very difficult to actually operate a large publicly listed company and not be extractive. It's just built into how you scale. And we've, I don't know, come to accept it financially, like, oh, you're going to make more money if you pay people less. But from a sustainability perspective, you could make even more money by paying people more because you're going to get a return on investment from attracting and keeping better talent. And you're not going to turn over that staff. And some of the staff are going to be creative and inventive, and they're going to bring you the new product that's going to generate your next franchise level revenue. So this is what's missed. And some of what's missed are the systems, like the accounting systems. We've all heard CEOs say, people are our most important asset. And however, people are not an asset on the balance sheet. They're actually a cost on the income statement. And so if any of you listening to this ever hear somebody say people are our most important asset again, I want you to ask that person, great, where are they on the financial statements? And it's not until people start to process that it transforms into, oh, yeah. Then there's like a counter argument to that is like, are you saying corporations should own people? No, corporations shouldn't own people, but corporations do lease the productive capacity of people working, just like Federal Express or airlines lease aircraft for their productive capacity. So there are existing and to be discovered financial constructs and statements and frameworks to support a more sustainable society and a more sustainable portfolio approach.
Just to go back ever so slightly, Paul, where would a metric like the number of children in a school or kindergarten figure in one of your assessments, one of your analyses?
Yeah, they usually figure because in the U.S. There are municipal bonds that are issued by school districts or issued by cities paying for school districts. And so school districts serve tens, hundreds, thousands of students in rural areas, suburban areas, cities, as well as charter schools, which are sort of new, innovative schools that focus on different characteristics, sometimes STEM focus, science, technology, engineering. And so we grade at HIP not only corporations and public equities, we grade government entities and nonprofit entities who issue bonds and municipal bonds as well as sovereign bonds.
That's fantastic. I love that you drill down to that level and you're using those sorts of data in your perspective. That's brilliant. There's a lot of factors and numbers go around as to how much or what sort of an impact a sustainable investing portfolio can have, particularly in comparison to, for example, all the other things that, we all try and do. Have shorter showers, fly less, take more public transport, recycle. What is your understanding of the impact an individual can have by investing responsibly or sustainably?
Right. So the impact on society is we treat people better. And so part of mental health is becoming people are becoming more and more comfortable starting to talk about mental health gaps as well as physical health. So on the physical health side, safer work where people don't get injured or die, for example. So that's one, easy to understand benefit that our moms would agree with. But a second is, what is an environment where people can be productive and apply their talents? And in a lot of cases, mental health is stressed either through lack of sleep, overwork, not great management culture, things like that. And so in a great place to work, for example, people are taken seriously. People's feedback is taken seriously. And so in a company like Intuit, which produces financial software and apps, every year there's an employee survey. and the employees give feedback on whether their environment and their management, as well as their working conditions. And the response to that is the HR and managers of Intuit, when there's a manager that has employees with low ratings, they hold the manager accountable. So not they fire unhappy employees. They engage with managers that have a propensity to have more unhappy employees versus happier employees. So, and happiness and productivity can go hand in hand, because you're going to work harder when you feel more appreciated. So that's one tangible output, like a better life for people doing work to provide for their family and invent cool stuff that solves problems. A second is, the Sustainable Development Goals have been evolved from the Millennial Development Goals. There's 17 of them: climate action, no more hunger, gender equality. And so, one of the benefits of a sustainable portfolio is solving those problems, allocating to stocks, bonds, funds, real estate that can solve those problems. So that's another potential benefit of a sustainable portfolio. Certainly, cleaner air, cleaner water, less pollution to pick up. That is another benefit. That is very tangible because there are quantitative metrics about water and water quality, energy and energy intensity, greenhouse gas emissions. These are trackable numbers, and they're meaningful numbers, and they're not complete numbers because there's in greenhouse gas emissions, there's scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 3 is everything down the customer chain and up the supplier chain. That's not fully visible yet in a methodical way. But if you focus on scope 1 and 2, what you're doing and what energy you're buying, that makes a lot of progress. And then more trust and more transparency. And so part of the evolution in the internet age is some of the media has been broken down, like investigative reporting that brings accountability and shines a light. And so some of that, which used to be done in for-profit newsrooms, is now done by some nonprofits, now done by some citizen journalists, but there's generally less than before. Now some of that's being counteracted with video and the like. So investing in a method that focuses on transparency, performance, and accountability to improve our society, make reality visible through data, grade investments based on achieving higher impact or punishing negative impact, and then making those decisions. When all of us do that, it ripples through. That's how change is made. Groups of people doing something progressive and forward-looking in service of a vision of a better world, because the future can be much better than the past. And so that's I'd say what the benefits are. And then financially, what we found, and academic analysts have found this over time, is higher hip rated investments generally make more money, and lower hip rated investments generally make less money. And so why wouldn't you want a portfolio that does that on average over time? And so that's what we're trying to bring to it. So truth about the world in a methodical way so that you can invest and live and build a better world.
Fantastic. That's everything I wanted to hear in a nutshell, Paul. I think what you and HIP doing are a great incentive to invest in the right way and have positive impact on personal outcomes as well as global and fully social outcomes. Would you be prepared to give us some sort of indication as to, broadly speaking, what sort of industries, what sort of technologies are seeing greater positive growth, socially responsible growth, that would be something for our audience, our listeners, to be excited about, spending more time focusing on, and a bit more interested in terms of their own portfolios?
Sure. Yeah. So some of the current growth themes are, in healthcare, anything related to diagnostics of observation. So in some cases that relates to artificial intelligence. I just had a CT scan this month where there was a 3D version of my skeleton so that you could see where my kidney stone was living right next to my bladder right now. That's a mix of hardware and software. Both chips like come from NVIDIA and AMD and Intel, as well as chip manufacturer, chip designers like Applied Materials, and then software, made by different parties, but those can include sort of bigger ones at, Microsoft, Google, Apple, but then, smaller focused ones. Medical devices is, also falls into that category. And then biotech. So we got out of, COVID with Pfizer and Moderna having already made progress in how to diagnose and bring different specialty drugs to do that. So those are some of the themes that we look at there. Then another big theme is as governments are allocating money to more energy efficiency and energy productivity, not in fossil fuels. We think fossil fuels is a high risk business that we are developing other solutions for. So whether it be electric vehicles and renewable energy infrastructure, but two of the companies that we're following pretty closely are Trane, Trane, and Carrier, as well as companies like Danaher. And these are companies, and Johnson Controls. And these are companies that are bringing sensors for energy management, energy usage, water management, water usage to apply. When we wrote the first HIP investor book back in 2010, there was a quote from the Johnson Controls CEO in, I think, 2008, 2009. And that Johnson Controls CEO said in the annual report, if all of our existing customers used all of our products in energy management and industrial servicing, their energy footprint would be reduced 25%. That's a pretty amazing statement. And it's a beautiful CEO statement because it's you can achieve this environmental goal and our business goal at the same time. And so that's a testament to the types of products that they have and to the utilization that is still to come. So those are some additional companies that will benefit from increased move to more environmental sustainability. There's a group of companies in an exchange traded fund that has been a part of our portfolio for a long time. Invesco, Power Shares, Water, so PHO. And so there's about 30 companies in there on water quality, water management, water efficiency. And so that fund to date over the past decade returns double digits on average over every year. So will it continue in the future? TBD. But that is when we think about commodities in investment language, you think about oil, or maybe you think about pork bellies or corn. But water is a commodity that is very precious, usually underpriced, frequently free. And so not as much attention is paid to it, but we can't live without water and we can't live without fresh water and clean water. So those would be some other topics. One different way to look at this is less industry and more management style. What we've found is, because management can be methodical and quantitatively supported, is companies with leaders who are trained as engineers or actual, living, breathing, working engineers, do tend to perform better on the metrics that we evaluate, people as well as planet and trust. And that's because they think as a system, and they track what happens. And one person who did this in the past was Paul O'Neill, who was more of a financial, trained person. But when he came to Alcoa, the aluminum company, they were having problems with safety, injuries, deaths, and finances. And what he pitched to the board at that time was, I'm just going to be accountable to one metric. What metric is that? Employee injuries and deaths. And so if our employees aren't comfortable making aluminum in the mills, then we're never going to make any money. And the board was like, I don't think that's right. And Paul O'Neill said, either, you agree or I'm not going to be here. Well, they said, okay, well, we agree. Well, 10 years later, they had the best performing, lowest injuries, fewest deaths, and highest financial performance. And so that's the type of leadership that it takes. Is there one or a handful of metrics that is the essence of our business, either from the customer or the employee, that is consistent, just like Johnson Controls. If you use all of our products, you will save money and you will save the environment. And by the way, you'll make us money. That is the challenge, so when you can identify those companies that are that clear. Schneider Electric is another one that's clear on that. There are a handful of companies that are writing annual reports that don't start with the company, they start with the earth, or they start with society, and they say, here's how our business operates inside the earth and inside society. And companies like Schneider Electric do that. So so there's exciting opportunities in all industries from innovators, as well as industries that are emerging. And then if we haven't touched on artificial intelligence yet, explicitly, that will be a factor, just like the internet has been a factor. And so finding the proper deployments of artificial intelligence, certainly in medical discovery, it's a big issue. You can basically feed in all the chemistry discoveries of the past 150 years, and there's and artificial intelligence is testing which of those might work. Now, it's no guarantee of working because human biology is not a robot, but it helps compress time and compress the number of things to test. So that can happen in healthcare, but it can also help in bridges and infrastructure. How do we use infrared technology to test the cracks and fissures in our infrastructure before there's a bigger impact? So lots of opportunities.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, you knew being good can actually create better profits.
It can. So on average, over time, as a group, and, nothing's 100%, so there's exceptions to that. But as a general methodology, in a diversified portfolio using, a sustainable approach, you can explain it to your mom. She'll feel good about it. Their positive return on investment potential, and you're creating the world that you want to live in if you believe in a more sustainable world versus a more extractive world.
Yeah, listen to your mum. Great advice. Paul, that's been an education, an inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us, giving us these terrific insights on what you and Hip Investor are doing. I think that gives all of us reason to be hopeful for ourselves, hopeful for the planet, and I'm so glad you're here doing this for all of us. Really.
Well, thanks, Chris, and I'm so glad you're here, showing how green money matters, and to help illuminate, educate, and inspire everybody listening today. So it's your money, so invest it in the way that you think is right. And glad that we can all build a better world together. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Paul Herman, Hip Investor. Thank you so much. And that wraps up another episode of Green Money Matters.
We hope you're feeling inspired to take your investments to new green heights. Remember, it's not just about the bottom line anymore. By aligning your investments with sustainable values, you have the power to shape a better future for generations to come.
If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe to Green Money Matters on your favorite podcast platform and never miss an opportunity to grow your wealth sustainably. Together, let's make money matter for the planet.
And don't forget to leave us a review. We really would love to hear your thoughts or ideas for future episodes. Drop me a line by email at chris@greenmoneymatters.com.
Stay tuned for our next exciting episode, where we'll explore groundbreaking investment opportunities and unveil the secrets of successful sustainable investors. Until then, remember, green money matters. Because investing in our planet's future is the smartest choice you can make. Thanks for joining us.